significance of events that are occurring around us in light of Bible prophecy. Pray that you will help us always keep in mind that this world, as troubling as it can be, that it will be cleaned up when the Lord returns to rule and reign. We look forward to that day. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, crazy week. So we're going to talk about crisis to crisis. We had a little bit of a church meeting, some business we had to take care of. This is kind of an interesting example. Summer without Charlie vector restrictions, yay, 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 yay. And now, is it World War III that's happening? So things change quickly. Here's some of the platforms that we're on. I think we're also on Odyssey, and we're still working on rolling out an audio podcast. We talk each week about the convergence of events, how quickly things are happening. And again, the grid that I use is this ACLU that I've kind of developed, acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. And I talk about that each week because we know that as we get closer to the end, Daniel was told, he asked the question, when shall the end of these things be, in the last chapter of the book of Daniel? And the response was, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried. And then it's contrasting them with the wicked. The wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise, those who have been purified and made white and are studying, but the wise shall understand. And it also says earlier in Daniel 11:32 that they that understand among the people shall instruct many. So we try to be that. So let's just look at a couple things. Look, I'm going to do one quick thing on the church. I have an update about Canada, because I think that's what's going on up there is very significant on a world scale. And then we'll look at, you may have heard some things about Ukraine this week, and whether that fits into Bible prophecy, or how that might fit in Bible prophecy or have implications for things that are going to take place. And I think there are some. I don't think it's a direct fulfillment, but it certainly shows some things we'll talk about. So here's something. This is a report from American Family News that Methodist Seminary prioritizes Wiccan and other unbiblical religions. This is the United Methodist Church is splitting over liberal theology and its view of the Bible. This is what the article says. In fact, one of the denomination's seminaries has abandoned Christian theology altogether. Denver-based Iliff School of Theology was one of the United Methodist showcase schools, founded 130 years ago as a theology school committed to the teachings of John Wesley and the Holy Spirit. But Dr. Matt Ayers, president of Wesley Biblical Seminary in Mississippi, says that the Denver Seminary Iliff has not only left Orthodox theology, it has abandoned the entire Bible itself. They have students who are Hindus, Universalists, Jews, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic. One of their senior MDiv students served at the Wiccan Church, which would be a witch church, a pagan church. In fact, the Institute on Religion and Democracy, a group that advocates for Christian orthodoxy, argues in a recent piece that the Colorado Seminary embraces paganism and points out that Iliff's explanation of its core values say nothing directly about God, Jesus Christ, or the Bible. This is similar. This has happened in a lot of places. At the University of Southern California, which, I mean, it's Southern Cal, it's USC, that's in some respects in Ohio, we view, that as one of the evil empire schools, but they hired a chaplain a number of years ago who was an atheist, happened to be the son of Tony Campolo, Bart Campolo. And if you read some of the things he wrote, it's shocking. But look, this is the state of the world that these things happen. So back to the school in Denver, the alumni profile section on the seminary's website celebrates a chaplain who is part of the Atheistic American Humanist Society, and the school has especially close ties to the Unitarian Universalist Church, even offering classes that a student will need to be ordained to that religion. And this is what happens when you abandon the faith. So we have these things on the right, which we talk about: identity politics, social gospel, LGBTQ rights, and the wokeness that's coming, as opposed to scriptural authority, Great Commission, and disciple making that should be evident in all churches and seminaries that are staying true to the Word of God. So this Ilif is no longer a seminary, it is a cemetery for the faith. Well, let's see. Let's go to Canada. So we talked a lot about this over the last week. There was a big protest of truckers. They were concerned about mandates that would require them to get a state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er. And some of the people who were protesting had already received that. But if you didn't have it and you tried the state-approved treatment and you tried to cross the border because of rules in Canada and US that have been adopted to require that state-approved treatment, you could end up in quarantine for up to 2 weeks. That makes it a little bit economically unviable for somebody to drive a truck across the border of Canada, either from US to Canada or vice versa. And the truckers were protesting that. They received a lot of support. The reaction of the Canadian government was, I would say, fair to say that it was draconian. Trudeau and his crew, the Prime Minister, put in place what's called the Emergencies Act, which had never been done before in Canada for any reason. There was a prior act that his father had put in place back in 1970 when they were having some Quebec separatists that had, I believe, kidnapped and killed a member of the Canadian Parliament during their protest. So Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, came in and used the Emergency Act that existed at that time to quell that obvious outright rebellion. And so what you saw in conjunction with similar things that have come out of our government, where they're trying to shut down misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. Those are the 3 code words that are used by the Department of Homeland Security. And there's a protest on its way to Washington area. I don't think they have any intention to go down in the middle of DC, but they've put the fence back up around the Capitol. And I'm just telling you, you're going to see a tremendous amount of propaganda. That is one thing that I think was indicative of this week as things unfolded with regard to Canada over the last month and with regard to Russia's invasion into Ukraine, that there is propaganda flying around like I've never seen. And again, this that graphic that I used in my first slide about the chasm that exists, this is, and I'm talking in the Christian community, viewing what's going on. Does it relate to Bible prophecy? Does it have any significance? You know, there would be a chasm between a lot of people, but then people who would support the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and people who would be concerned about it. And unfortunately, what happens, I kind of have a middle view, is why don't y'all just leave everybody else alone and, go home and try to work it out? But I'm not on the list of advisors that Mr. Putin calls. But there's this propaganda and this narrative that's going. So this week, all of a sudden, you're not hearing much about this, are you? It seems to be disappearing. They're rolling back mandates all over the place. They're rolling back passports that were required to show that you had received a state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er and its various variants. My question is, okay, so they're rolling back mandates. They're not requiring this anymore. Are the people that got fired going to get their jobs back? I mean, has anybody talked about all of the airline pilots that lost their jobs, the nurses, the doctors? it has been a propaganda war from the beginning, regardless of how you feel about different things. And if you talk about it, you get banned from social media. So that's one of the reasons we don't talk about it that much here. There's some other platforms I'm on occasion that we talk about it. By the way, on Tuesday, I will be doing Stand Up for the Truth. Standforthetruth.com is their website, Q90FM in Green Bay, Wisconsin, with David Fiorazo. So that'll air from 10 to 11 Eastern Time on Tuesday, March 1st. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of these issues that, just to protect the sermons part of our church, things we don't talk a lot about, except using some code language, I guess, because that's the world that we live in. And it's interesting now that a lot of public authorities have now come out and they're saying the same thing, that people who oppose what the public authorities wanted to do with regard to this, are the public authorities now going to be banned from social media? It's a crazy world. I mean, it's propaganda everywhere you go. So back to Canada. So there in the law, within a certain period of time, I think it's 10 or 14 days after the prime minister declares an emergency. And the question became very quickly, what's the emergency? Because you cleared all the trucks out. You opened the border crossings that had been blocked by some guys. Where's the emergency? So it was presented to the House part of Parliament, and it passed that he had the right to go forward with the emergencies. Well, then it had to go to the Senate, and there were some senators that were pushing back. And I don't have a lot of clips, but the reaction of the Canadian government was they just shut everything down that was related to the protests. They froze the money. GoFundMe was collecting money. They'd collected somewhere around $8 million. GoFundMe said, well, if you want a refund, go ahead and ask for it. But if you don't ask for a refund back, we're going to give it to a charity of our choice. Well, a lot of people pushed back on GoFundMe. So then other sites were set up, some cryptocurrency sites were set up, and the government came in through this deputy prime minister mainly. I don't know that the prime minister is smart enough to do any of this, but the deputy prime minister, I think she also serves as the finance minister in the Canadian government, Chrystia Freeland. If there ever was a person who's been misnamed, it's a person who put in these draconian restrictions and maintains the name called Freeland. I mean, that's just utter nonsense. But she came in. I did a short update Thursday, I think, like 3 minutes, talking about this being revoked. In a future update, I will play some of her clips. She stands behind the prime minister in these updates, and she's in a mask, and she looks like she's mouthing the words that Trudeau is speaking, and she's fidgeting all over the place. I made a light of it on Facebook, saying that I don't know what happened, but she was fidgeting so much that I wondered if maybe she had gotten an early version of the Neuralink brain implant. And you know how it is. It's sort of, this used to happen on Sunday mornings all the time when I had Windows. My PowerPoint or Microsoft operating system would do an automatic update just as I was getting up to speak. So I wondered if she was having an automatic update to her new brain implant chip while she was speaking, and it was, she was in the process of shutting down and rebooting. But she's very intelligent. She speaks, I think, 4 or 5 languages. I think she speaks Ukrainian. I think she's Ukrainian ethnic background, but she is on the board of the World Economic Forum. So enough said. Now, immediately, of course, there are all these, excuse me, Canadian people pushing back, or people writing, oh, you conspiracy theorists, the World Economic Forum is nothing. Why do you worry about it? And when they do that, you've got them, right? You know that you're hitting a nerve. And so this is what happened. So the Emergencies Act was going to go to the Senate. The senators pushed back. And then suddenly, I think unexpectedly, around 5 p.m. on Thursday, Justin Trudeau said, hey, we're not going to go forward with the Emergencies Act because we think we have all the tools in place. You might remember the video of the lady who was trampled by the horse. She lived. I've heard that she had a dislocated shoulder. She was using a walker or one of those scooters that people use in Walmart and other big stores. Somebody asked one of the Canadian police, how's that lady doing? She goes, what lady? We know of no lady who was injured in anything that the police did. And that's what I said is you just can, the propaganda and outright lying that's going on. Now, I'm not going to talk about, I probably will talk in the future. Biden has nominated a person to fill the vacancy on the United States Supreme Court. That is being vacated by Stephen Breyer when he retires after the end of the term at the end of June. She'll probably be approved, but you need to know she is a very radical leftist. It's a big surprise, right? So Biden is paying that back. And this is, I don't see any concerted Republican opposition to her. And enough Republicans will cross over and vote for her, so she'll be the next, unless something happens or surfaces, she'll be the next Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Well, I have a lot to talk about. So here we go. Russia, Ukraine. Now, right out of the box, I want to say that I don't see any particular Bible prophecy being fulfilled. At best, there is a stage setting, and a lot of that revolves around whether Russia is part of this in the end times or not. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with that. I don't know why you would wish to be me, but if anybody wants to be me during the week, you're welcome to wade through the messages that I get. I get sent books, messages, outlines, detailed emails, papers about everybody's different view of whether this is significant in Bible prophecy or not. Some people think that it is. I happen to think that its significance is that it shows the condition of the world as to how things are unfolding. And I'll talk about this a little bit, the map of the world is changing. We have this tendency, we sort of think that everything's going along the same that it's always been. But the map of the world, as over the last generation, somebody cited this statistic, I haven't confirmed it, so I'll just throw it out there, that there have been somewhere around 40 new countries that have come about in the last 40 or so years. The map of the world has changed. It changed this week. And one thing we know in Bible prophecy is that the map of the world is going to go through some pretty dramatic changes in the future. And if we are at that time that's getting close to the Lord's return in that final period of history, then we should expect these things to happen. And it can be very difficult. So there was a lot, and what I said, there was a lot of propaganda going back and forth. For days, the Biden administration kept saying the invasion of Ukraine is coming tomorrow, today, tonight, tomorrow. Well, next day. And it didn't come. My own feeling, I think I expressed this a couple weeks ago, that it would probably not happen until after the Olympics concluded. Those Olympics concluded. I'll have to play a clip of that in a future update. Goodness gracious. The globalism, New World Order stuff in UN that was at the Beijing Olympics closing ceremony was just incredible. So for days, day after day, the Biden administration, he's going to attack Putin's going to attack Ukraine. Putin's going to attack Ukraine. Within days, tomorrow, it was a constant stream of this happening. Even this is more related to what's the impact on Bible prophecy. And I think this is where it comes, and I'll talk about this more later, but the article came up. This is an article from Al-Akbar, which is published in Lebanon. It is a Hezbollah mouthpiece. And what the title of the article there on the upper right, and I'm trying to remember when this article was published. I think it was around Thursday or Friday. And the title of the article, translated from the Arabic, is and now mind you, this is a Hezbollah mouthpiece. Hezbollah is a captive arm of the radical mullahs that run Shiite Islamic Iran. They are Shiite Islamists. They are directed by a guy named Nasrallah. The prior head of Hezbollah in Lebanon, he was assassinated about 30 years ago. I believe Nasrallah replaced him. And Nasrallah came out this week and he said, listen, they honored these 3 martyrs from Hezbollah, and he said, I'll summarize, we got Israel. We got them in our sights. We can take care of them. They don't know what's coming. Now, Nasrallah is a propagandist, and he's always pumping up his people, but I think in this current environment, the way things seem to be coming together biblically, he's a guy you should pay attention to. But anyway, in their newspaper, Al-Akbar, published in Lebanon, the title of this article is Israel in the Face of Iranian Transformations, Reneging on Lost Bets. Parallel to the successive indications of the possibility of reviving the nuclear agreement in Vienna, Israel continues to promote alternative options that it will be compelled to behave in a transitional phase, which will be fraught with transformations, according to Israel's national security advisor. However, and this is translated from the Arabic, so the English is a little bit rough. However, these options do not indicate that they will be in effectiveness and results different from their predecessors, which foretells a quick return to them that shortcomings and miscalculation were its most prominent feature starting in the 70s. In other words, listen, and they talk about the enemy's prime minister. So they always refer to Israel as the enemy, the occupier. He's just going to say, listen, you think you got it all figured out? We're going to show you something different. And so this is a concern among Israeli people in the security front. Do we have enough to withstand a barrage of rockets? I think this week we saw that, related to this, we saw this change in modern warfare that we've talked about a lot here, that guided missiles, different types of missiles, more effective, precise missiles, drones, and that type of thing are really a game changer on the modern battlefield. One article I'll refer to sometime during this, I wouldn't say shortly, but some great articles by Seth Frantzman in the Jerusalem Post this week, a bunch of great articles on Friday and then today in the Jerusalem Post analyzing the situation in Ukraine and how it relates to Israel in the immediate environment of Israel. And so this drone thing is a game changer. So, here's just some of the headlines that we see, and even in financial papers like the Financial Times. Putin blames Kiev for escalation and brings forward nuclear drills. In fact, the news this morning is that Putin has put his nuclear forces on high alert. At the same time, they're also talking about peace talks. Here's also from the Financial Times. Drumbeats of war are sounding in Europe, and then on the left, Biden's information war with Putin. And there are all these Twitter accounts and stuff recently created, and they're flooding people's boxes and Twitter feeds with information. Here again, this is from the Times of London, the Putin show. Is he putting on, is this bluster? at the same time all this is going on, we sort of have this China's making moves. They've taken over Taiwan or Hong Kong. They're putting in these rules that are effectively shutting down Taiwan. And there's a concern that they may make a move on Taiwan as a result of what's going on. I'll talk again a little bit. The list of what I'm going to talk about shortly keeps growing. So here's what happened on Monday, the 21st. Putin had a meeting of his Security Council. It was kind of a strange meeting. I'll play a clip of it later. He talked about the fact that, listen, what we're going to do with regard to Ukraine is we're going to move in there. And so on the right there, you see these areas held by separatists, the Donbass and Luhansk regions of eastern Ukraine. They're heavily ethnic Russian. There is also another area of, if I can get my laser pointer up here. Hang on here. This area over here in Moldova is another heavily ethnic Russian area that's also being threatened. Odessa is a major port on the Black Sea. Russia back in 2014 had taken over the Crimean Peninsula, which they claim was heavily ethnic Russian, and Ukraine has reacted to that. I mean, that happened in 2014. Ukraine controls the water supply to the Crimean Peninsula, and they've been cutting it off. So that has not made Putin very happy. And then there's a Russian sea base here, I think at Mariupol, that they took over. But there's also, this coast is very important to Ukraine. They don't have any water access to the east, west, and north. It's all to the south in the Black Sea. And the Russian troops are coming in and they're taking over. Now, Ukraine's not an insignificant country. I mean, look at some of the things here. It's first in Europe in proven recoverable reserves of uranium, second place in Europe and 10th place in the world in terms of titanium and reserves. If you go down here in the middle, it's an important agricultural area, first in Europe in terms of arable land area. It's about the size of Texas. They have 40 million people. The population is about 40 million. That's the largest country in Europe, land-wise, that's based solely in Europe. It's an important industrial area, and in these regions that have become these. So, I mean, Ukraine has a lot of resources, and so in these breakaway areas that have been a thorn in the side of Putin now for a while. There's been shelling back and forth between Russian-supported troops and Ukrainian-supported troops. Putin calls it a genocide. It's not something that's been publicized that much, but it's a big deal to Vladimir Putin. The estimates I saw from some study done by the International Crisis Group, which is a security think tank, used to be run by Robert Malley, who's now the lead negotiator for the U.S. Talks, the talks taking place in Vienna, Austria, with regard to the renewal of the Iranian deal on nuclear development and weapons. And it's not going very well for the U.S., but he used to be CEO of that. It's a largely Soros-funded group. They estimate there's been about 14,000 people killed over the past decade. And so Putin doesn't like that, and he's claiming that that was genocide. We also have this area up here in the north of the country, which is where Chernobyl was, the exclusion zone that was taken over by Russia in the early days this week. And there was, how are they going to attack? The capital city is Kiev. You have I don't know how you say it, Viv, Odessa, Kharkiv in the northeast part of the country. I think it's the second largest city. And Russia came in. They just, you'll see Putin, I'll play his announcement. You have, again, the Crimean Peninsula, which has been in Russian hands since 2014. That's what I've talked about. Remember I told you about that report that was in Investors Business Daily that Putin had flown this icon from the Russian Orthodox Church around the Crimean Peninsula before the invasion occurred. I personally believe that that's true. There's a choke point there. The Sea of Azov is very important to Ukraine. And of course, there's this choke point with a bridge. Russia doesn't like the Crimea, doesn't connect to Russia, so there's talk they're going to take over this southern part at least, so they have a land bridge to Crimea and they don't have to hop on a boat or go around the other way. They want, better access to Crimea. They don't want to have to go across that bridge because bridges can be taken out in battles. So a lot of things happening. You'll see these pictures everywhere of what's going on. There seems to be quite a bit of bad blood between Putin and the current president of Ukraine, a guy named Zelensky. He's Jewish. He used to be a comedian. He starred in a TV show. There was I'm trying to remember when it was. It was back in the late 2000s, I believe, that somewhere between 2008 and 2014, Russia didn't like the Ukrainian government, thought it was corrupt, so they took out the leadership and put in a Russian puppet, a guy named, I think his name was Lyshenko. By the way, Lyshenko has been seen, interviewed in the last couple of days saying, I don't like what Vladimir Putin is doing. I think it's wrong. I think he should go home. There was some talk that Putin will take out Zelensky and the other members of the Ukrainian government and install a puppet government, which seems to be part of his plan. And the talk is he will just go in and he will do a decapitation strike and kill them. So I saw a video of a guy this morning. They are passing out AR-15s to civilians. They're giving them grenades. They're showing them how to make Molotov cocktails. And then I saw a video this morning of a guy saying, well, this is what's so hard, is because you don't know if this is a guy expressing his opinion or if he's acting as sort of an independent Pravda to give the Russian party line. So he says, well, this is just terrible. That's going to result in a slaughter, and how evil these people are that are running Ukraine. Putin refers to them in speeches as corrupt criminals and drug addicts, and we need to get rid of them. They're a terrible blight on society. Like, there's no corruption in Russia. Come on. I mean, really. And so it's very difficult to navigate. And so what you see is there is a large part of what I would call Christian community is very pro-Russian. Go Vladimir. Vladimir's doing right. Everything he's saying is true. It's historical. Others are saying, Putin is evil. I've been in communication with Ukrainian missionaries who are very concerned about the situation. There is an active evangelical church in Ukraine outside of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So you need to pray for those people, support them if you can. So this is interesting. Occupy Democrats, though, this is what they tweeted back in 2016. No civilian needs an AR-15, regardless of whatever mental gymnastics you do. You are a very special breed of stupid if you support that. If you could zoom out, Brian, here's the most recent tweet. Breaking, Ukraine's interior minister announced that 10,000 automatic rifles have been handed out to the civilians of Kiev as they prepare to fight tooth and nail to defend their homes. Retweet if you stand with the brave Ukrainian people. So now it's okay. And so the one thing that you've seen is that There's plenty of in the world. They always talk about peak oil. We're going to eventually run out of oil. We're going to reach oil, and it's going to decline. The production's going to decline. It's going to have a big impact on the world because you just can't pump enough. It's not economically viable to pump it. Well, there's no peak hypocrisy until the Lord returns. That's going to, if hypocrisy were oil, we wouldn't need solar panels or windmills, okay? Let's just put it that way. Interesting editorial cartoons that you see. Of course, here's Marx, Lenin, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Putin. And I watched Putin's speech, and I know that, Putin can put on a good show. The question is how intelligent, how powerful is he? The Russian economy is maybe 3% of world GDP. They've done a very good job of pouring money into defense and hypersonic missiles and nuclear missiles, and they have a formidable defense and offensive military capability, but it's been done, I think, at the expense of development of other aspects of the Russian economy, which is reeling in many respects because Russia has one of the worst demographic profiles on the planet. I've reported a number of times articles that I've seen, Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, and elsewhere, that perhaps as much as 20-25% of Moscow's population is Islamic. That Putin, he's smart enough to know that he needs to deal with that. But the birth rate is collapsed. There is tremendous alcoholism within Russia. And I know that my pro-Russian friends are going to say, John, you just don't know. You need to listen to so-and-so, and they will tell you everything you need to know about Russia. Listen, I can read. I listen to those guys. I listen to people on the other side. I'm just going to tell you, I don't like Vladimir Putin. Okay, I think he's a thug, and I think he's proving it this week to prove his point. And so this is what Jonathan Spire wrote about Putin's masquerades. He's I think, a very good analyst in the Middle East. I'm trying to. I've lost my mouse now. There we go. Hang on a second here. I'm going to have to exit out of this. There it is. I can never tell there it is, which side I'm on because it's backwards. So history moves in curious patterns. Jonathan Spire says the countdown to the current fraught moment in Ukraine may be accurately defined. It began 9 years ago on the Maidan Central Square in Kiev in the winter of 2013-2014. Ukraine independence since 1991. Chose irrevocably at that time to link its fortunes to those of the West. What began as a small protest in the city's central square against the suspension of an EU association agreement turned into a stark challenge to the then prevailing pro-Russian power structure in the country. They put somebody in, then a Russian puppet came in, then there were some elections, and eventually Zelensky came in. And everybody says everybody else is corrupt, and a plutocrat, and drug dealers, and drug addicts. And so all I know is that we had a big problem in our government with Ukrainian influence. I mean, it's clear that millions of dollars were paid by the Ukrainian government to the Biden family. Millions. Through a Ukrainian gas company. Well, they didn't do that because the president's son was an expert in oil and gas production and distribution. Why do you think they did that? But then that led to the first impeachment of Donald Trump because he had stood up against that. So, there's plenty of blame to go around. And so I would highly recommend you get this article from Jonathan Spire, and he concludes with this. It is therefore distinctly possible that the Russian leader still intends to achieve his goals in the hybrid 21st century fashion using a buildup of military force. This is written before the invasion, to apply pressure and produce panic in his enemies, causing the West to abandon firm commitments to the government in Kiev out of fear of war or fear of nuclear weapons. I played you the clip that he did at the dialogue in Sochi a number of years ago, where he said, listen, we'll use nuclear weapons if we have to, if we think we're threatened, and we'll go to heaven and the rest of you will go to hell. And that's sort of the way he thinks. And to ignore that, I think, is at your peril. So get that, because it's interesting. And this is the Black Sea region. This is Turkey. Interesting part of this, we talk about this in terms of Gog, Magog. Who's Gog? Where's Magog? And there's a dispute in Bible prophecy. Let me back out just a little bit further. In Bible prophecy, there's a bunch of people think that Russia is Gog, Putin is Gog, or the leader of Russia will be Gog, and Magog is Russia, and it will lead an attack on Israel in the last days. That's Ezekiel 38 and 39. Others think that Magog, Meshach, Tubal is in Turkey. That's the way that I lean. Then other people will say, well, it doesn't make any difference. It's where they ended up. So you have to look at the migration patterns of the descendants of Japheth and Magog and Meshach and Tubal. Where did they end up? And so the question then becomes, well, what did Ezekiel see when he had this vision about this invasion from the north? And by the way, we know at the end of the millennium, we all agree at the end of the millennium, there's a Gog-Magog battle. Now the question is there one that's a partial fulfillment of it in Ezekiel 38 and 39? I believe in two of them, but everybody gets in their fight mode in Bible prophecy, and no, it's only one. I can't believe you can't see that. And well, I think there are two. I can't believe you can't, and then we're back and forth and we're fighting over it. And the best answer will be if there is one before the Lord comes back and sets up his millennial kingdom. Then we'll know for sure, and all the debates will be over. But, and so the question is when Magog was really there in southern Turkey, northern Syria. That was the region back in those days. Now, some extended up into Russia. But the question is, what was Ezekiel talking about when he had the vision? Was he looking at a vision like, okay, Magog will come from the north? Is he thinking of it when he writes that as the map in his mind and what he would consider to be the remote parts of the north, which would be that area? Or was he looking to where they migrated? I think that's an open question. I really do think it's an open question. Because there's probably a lot of intermarrying that's gone on in the human race over the last 2,600 years since Ezekiel wrote this. So it's not settled. We'll see how it happens. I think Turkey is important. And if you want to make it into contemporary times, I think my friend Doug Hamp has another book out called Corrupting the Image 3, which talks about Gog, looking through Assyrian documents and that type of thing. Putting Gog, this is sort of a god of the eastern people that lived in the area of Magog, which was in what would be southern Turkey, but certainly part of the Assyrian Empire. It's an Assyrian idea. And I think Doug does a great job of analyzing. I'm not sure I agree with it. I haven't read the whole book yet, but I'm working through it. But it's worth talking about. But it's interesting if it is put in modern terms. By the way, I forgot to mention early on, thank you for the birthday wishes this week. 2 days after my birthday, another person in the world turned 68, and his name is President Erdogan of Turkey. So if you run into him, wish President Erdogan a happy 68th birthday. But it's interesting when you put it in terms of Gog and Magog in the Assyrian Empire. He was mayor of Istanbul, but his family actually comes from a city in Georgia, and then they migrated to a city here on the northern coast, the northern part of Turkey on the southern part of the Black Sea, which would have been in the realm of the ancient Assyrian Empire, which is kind of interesting. Now, I'm not saying that Erdogan is the guy. He sure acts like it at times. You know, there's times when you want to say, if you don't want people to speculate that you're the Antichrist, then don't act like it. That's a good way to do it. And look, there are people that think Macron is a candidate, and time will tell. So Monday, Putin has his meeting of Security Cabinet. He announces that he has declared 2 separatist republics. He gets on the air and he makes this announcement.
Считаю необходимым принять уже давно назревшее решение. Незамедлительно признать независимость и суверенитет Донецкой Народной Республики и Луганской Народной Республики. Прошу Федеральное собрание Российской Федерации поддержать это решение.
So he puts in front of the assembly, and I showed you pictures of it a couple weeks ago, a resolution to recognize Donetsk and Donbass and Luhansk as independent republics. Therefore, Putin can then say, well, listen, we can just, they're inviting us in to help them out. They're an independent country. That's not a problem. And we can just move in here as we want. And there should be no problem. So that was filmed. That was Monday. He filmed that and put it up on YouTube. Well, then that led to a subsequent announcement that was put up 3 days later. And I'm going to play you that clip, but compare to how Putin looks on Monday and what they put up on Thursday. Because Monday says, well, you know, we want peace and we want to do things. And understand, Putin is probably not officially, but many consider him to be the richest person in the world. He controls a lot of money. His house on the Black Sea is estimated to be worth $1 billion. Pretty pricey digs. He was a KGB agent. I'll talk a little bit about his orientation. So on Thursday, it would have been Thursday morning in Russia, early in the morning, he put up this video. Now, you see what he looks like, right? This is February 21st. And here on February 24th this is a screenshot. So I'm asking you, is there, certainly he has more than one suit, right? So here's what he said. This is what was put up on the 24th. And I'm going to do a special military operation. I've had it. I'm done with it. In his speech on Monday, he had gone through, this speech is, I think, over an hour long. He went through this long history of Russian grievances. You know, Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church came out of Kiev, and this was Russian territory. And now the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has split off, and I want to restore Christianity. I'm tired of this, and so we are going to take this back for Mother Russia. Now, he's also made statements. So, look, I'm just going in here to Donetsk and Luhansk, and anybody tries and stop us, to our country, to our people, should know that Russia's response will be immediate and lead you to such consequences that you have never faced in your history. We are ready for any outcome. And this is consistent with what he said. So I've taught you that what he views. There was a great article at Unheard talking about the spiritual aspect of what Putin is doing, and that he wants to restore Mother Russia. And that includes the Russian Orthodox Church. He views Ukraine as contrary to that. So there's just all sorts of, I could go for hours about all the things. Zelensky, he put up, there were reports that Zelensky had fled to Western Ukraine. He went out on the streets of Kiev, at least it looks like it, and says, we're all here. Here's me, here's my, second in command, here's the defense minister, we're all here, come and get us. The West response as best has been, I would describe it as weak. They're doing sanctions. I think this is a good article or editorial cartoon from the Times of London. Some people said, well, remember how the Russians reacted in the Czechoslovakia revolt back in 1968? It was pretty brutal. And the same thing seems to be happening here. This is the new cover of Newsweek that just came out, Danger Zone. Everybody's talking about it. Some tech publications building on this is a paper from back in the 90s, cyber war. That's where cyber war seemed to be first used. A Rand Corporation report. New Scientist has an article, will Russia's invasion of Ukraine trigger a massive cyber war? There is a cyber war going on. I think some, like British Airways said, we won't fly to Russia. We won't let them fly here. My understanding is the British Airways system was down for a day or so. I tried to access the Kremlin's website because I wanted to get transcripts of Putin's speech. That website has been down. Now, maybe Putin took it offline. I don't know. It's not accessible. I tried for 2 days. And the question is, Russia's pretty good at cyber war. They've invested a lot of money in that aspect of technology, not so much in developing their own. This is from the Atlantic. The threat of cyber war has finally arrived. And this is what they talk about: disinformation and neologism from the Cold War, from the Russian desinformatia, or however they would say it. And this is what the KGB did. They had 1 million people doing propaganda back during the Cold War. So look, I know that there's people who are very pro-Putin. I've been told that I'm totally wrong. So there was, sanctions. There's a picture of the Kiev, one of the cities, I think it's the eastern city in Ukraine, Kharkiv, I think it's called. The subway, people were fleeing to the subway. There were massive traffic jams trying to get out of Ukraine. A couple 100,000 people have fled. It's interesting that some of the people are fleeing to the east, mainly because to the west is Russia. They're fleeing to the east, former Eastern European countries of Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, that used to be under the control of Russia. And the question is, everybody was like, what's he doing? So here's an opinion piece. I'm trying to remember where I saw this. Anyway, Biden's war on fossil fuels has strengthened Putin and weakened America. That's exactly correct. Somebody said he's put in sanctions, but somebody said he's sanctioned North American oil resources more than he has Putin's so far. And what happens with the sanctions? What's going to happen? The price of oil and gas is going to go up. Well, who does that benefit? Now, they're trying to remove Putin and Russia's ability to get money, but they have Iran and China to help do the workaround. They have huge currency reserves, and I don't know if they can shut that down. They're going to try. They should maybe talk to Chrystia Friedland from she seemed to do a pretty good job shutting down the money to the truckers, so maybe she can take that experience and shut down the money to Putin. Well, we'll see. But what happens if the price of oil goes up and the money still flows to Putin? Well, the increase in price of oil finances Putin's war. He's not out of pocket anything because of the increase in the cost of gas and oil. Germany hasn't really wanted to sanction them because they're dependent on Russia for natural gas for heating. Now, they've said they won't approve Nord Stream 2, but they've been getting along, without Nord Stream 2 so far. So they've been very weak. And one of their former chancellors is on the board of Gazprom, which is the main Russian owned, the company that owns main one that owns gas. So lots of, So here's the impact on markets. Stocks way down, stocks rallied, stocks down, stocks up. One thing that's concerned, now there were reports that Turkey had shut down the access to the Black Sea. Turkey came out and said, no, we haven't done that. But that's a breadbasket. Ukraine is one of the biggest grain producers on the planet. I think 25% of the world's production. A number of countries, many countries, 50% dependent on grain from Ukraine. Well, if that's shut down and Ukraine can't get their grain to market next year, what's that going to, this thing has a long-term impact regardless of how it works out. Here's a little bit of turmoil on global markets, headlines everywhere, war in Ukraine, and now it's in the fog of war, so it's difficult to get accurate information. I mean, I've seen reports of 3,000 dead Russian troops. I don't know that there's proof of that. And there's many dozens, at least, if not hundreds, dead of Ukrainian civilians and military. There's a video out there where it's a video of a Russian battle. It's an audio of a Russian battleship where they're telling Ukrainian soldiers to surrender. And they say, Russian warship, go blank yourself. And then they're shot. And so everybody says these men are heroes. They died in the service of defense of Ukraine. And now there are reports on social media from Russian sources saying, no, those men weren't killed. They surrendered and now they're happy and living in Russia. I mean, it's hard to get the accurate information. So Putin thinks this is a historical thing that he's doing. This is righting a grievance. So if you go back to my earlier thing, when we talk about Bible prophecy and the map, I'll use this one. So that's Nord Stream 2 going to Germany. Ukraine is down here in the foreground. There's the Baltic states there, west of Russia. They have about 8 million people. They have about 20% of the population. There's concerns about, is Putin going to go to them? So Putin has his historical grievance. You people are always trying to invade Russia, and we have to defend ourselves. This is a defense thing. And you put missiles in the Baltic states and elsewhere that are 100 miles from Leningrad, where Putin was born. And, he might have a point. If you don't have a lot of time to react to missiles like that, if they're that close. And this is Israel's point with the Golan Heights. You can't react to missiles that are on the Golan Heights and shooting down on people. That's an unfair tactical advantage. So the question is, how does all of this play out? Is NATO going to break apart? And I think this is Putin's plan. Now, in Jesse Waters the other night, Peter Zahan, who has a new book out called, he talks about it at the end. I think it's the end of everything. It's just the beginning or something. But he has a book about, the lame superpower that the United States has become. He was interviewed, it's about 5 minutes long. But I think it's a very good clip that shows how some people are thinking about what are the ultimate implications of this. And so you have to take it from there in a Bible prophecy sense and import it over to Russia. Oh, the other point I wanted to make, though, if I could back up. So when I talked about Gog, Magog, Meshach, Tubal, and some people saying, well, it doesn't matter where they started, it's where they ended up. That's where we have to be concerned about Bible prophecy. Maybe true, I don't know. I would just say, though, with regard to Israel, we know that Israel was scattered into the nations, right? But when we talk about Israel in the end times, what do we talk about? Do we talk about Israel scattered into Jewish people scattered into this country or that country? We talk about them in the land. So Israel's tied to the land. Why wouldn't Magog, Meshach, Tubal be tied to the land? I'm just suggesting that that's a possibility. So here's Jesse Waters with Peter Zahal Friday night. This is not what I would call an upbeat segment, but I think it's important to listen to.
With NATO now sending significantly more troops to their eastern flank and Russians closing in on Ukraine's capital, what can we expect to see in the next few weeks? Let's bring in the author of The Absent Superpower, Peter Zion. All right, Peter, give us the next 3 weeks, your projections.
Hey, Jesse. Well, first on the military side, there's the push to Kiev. There's the move from the eastern provinces to link up Crimea, and then the troops that are in Crimea are going to be moving west to take the capital, the economic capital of Odessa. If you do that, you basically can start really choking the Ukrainian system, both from a population point of view, an economic point of view, and then finally from a governmental point of view. And that is what they're working on right now. That is when things get really brutal. Because once they have Kiev and Odessa, they can move through whatever portions of the country at any time as they see fit. That's when we're going to see the pogroms. That's when we're going to see the Quislings. That is when we're going to see them going rank and file through the population, looking for folks who are willing to fight. They're going to find them. When the United States went into Iraq and Afghanistan, it wasn't nearly as difficult of a job as what the Russians are trying to do in Ukraine right now. And this is going to be a very bloody conflict. But from the American point of view, it's all about Europe. Because once the Russians control some of these key pieces of infrastructure, they're going to be able to lord that over the Germans, the Italians, the Poles, and say, look, you can either stop or you can go without Russian energy. And that's the fight that we're about to have.
So they'll seize Odessa and they'll get to the capital, and then they control the country and then hunt people down village by village, town by town, and then threaten the Western European nations to shut down the energy pipeline that flows through Ukraine and say, you know what, I dare you to do something about this? Is that what the next step is?
Well, think about it from Moscow's point of view. Either the Russians shut down the pipelines in Ukraine, or the Ukrainians bomb their own pipelines once they're losing their country. And when that happens, the Russians can say, hey, look, we've got this lovely project called Nord Stream 2. Why don't we ship some gas through that? So once we get to this point, the Russians will really be taking pry bars to the European relationships with one another and with the United States. Because at the end of the day, Ukraine isn't the end of the game for Russia. It's just the next step on the road. This started in Georgia. It went to Crimea, went to Kazakhstan. Now it's in Ukraine. We're not done. The next steps are Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And for that to work, you have to break the NATO alliance. They can do that with Ukraine.
So you break the alliance through Germany, is that right? If you threaten Germany and you turn off that pipeline that goes through Ukraine and you say it's time to restart Nord Stream 2, or you guys are going to be reading in the dark for the next couple months, does that move Germany in the right direction, or not the right direction, but, you know, away from NATO?
Absolutely. And I would underline it's not just Germany, it's Germany and Italy. Right. The Italians have done a great job of being very quiet this whole time.
Yeah, they have. They're letting Germany be the bad guy, but they're right behind them. So you're saying also the Baltics are in play. What kind of move would that look like? Because those are NATO countries. Are you saying Moscow is not afraid of triggering Article 5?
Today, they certainly would be. That's one of the reasons why they have to hive NATO apart first. If they can get to a position where the Europeans are not on the same page and the Americans, for a mix of reasons, might not trust the European partners anymore, then the combined population of the Baltics is under 8 million people. They would be far simpler to conquer than Ukraine.
And do you think that, well, I think at that point we'd know the Germans and the Italians would be willing to sacrifice the Baltics, but would the British, would the French, and would the Americans allow a split in NATO to do that?
That is absolutely the right question. From Moscow's point of view, Bush did nothing against Georgia. Obama did nothing against Crimea. Trump did nothing against general moves across the entire Eastern Front. And now the Biden administration is finding that after 20 years of malinvestment in the NATO alliance, it's not able to do anything in Ukraine. So from Putin's point of view, this is actually getting easier and easier rather than harder and harder from a geostrategic point of view. So if they can break those relationships, specifically between Washington and Europe, then it really doesn't matter what the Brits and the French do.
Excellent. And your new book comes out when, Peter?
We're looking at June, assuming that there's not another paper shortage.
Okay, sounds good. And the new book is called, aptly?
The end of the world is just the beginning.
All right, you predicted it. Thank you so much, Peter Zion, as always.
I thought it was a good interview, very informative. I thought it was, well thought out. So this is from Foreign Affairs, and I know this is published by the Council on Foreign Relations, which are a lot of globalists, neoliberals types. I see people declaring the end of the neoliberal order is over. Identity politics has killed it. And we don't know. We're in the fog of war right now. We don't know how this is going to play out over the next few months, let alone a year or two from now. I'm only suggesting to you that as I'm sort of looking at the big picture landscape in the light of what I understand Bible prophecy to say, I'm saying is that the world is shifting and changing very rapidly. This is the acceleration, convergence, logistics thing. Now, Russia may have bit off more than they can chew. Ukraine may fight back. They may have an insurgency. I don't know what's going to... They're supposed to have peace talks. I don't know, but Putin has put his nuclear forces on high alert. Is he going to use them if he feels threatened? I mean, he was saying today, I don't like the way you people are acting. This is a meeting that he had. So he has the same suit on and the same desk. I think he recorded the thing about the invasion on Monday. He seems to be very isolated, but he talked to a group of business leaders. And this has become typical of Putin. Look at him. He's like 40 feet from everybody, at least in public. People say he's become isolated, sort of paranoid. Again, I would refer you to the Unheard article that talks about the religious spiritual aspect. I'm not saying I agree with that, okay? I'm just saying this is how people have analyzed Putin. He has an advisor that has a mystical aspect to him named Alexander Dugin. I don't know if he follows Dugin anymore, but Dugin used to be very influential. And you can find English language things of Dugin on YouTube. Go look at him. I mean, the guy, I think it was Foreign Affairs did an article years ago, called him Putin's brain. This is a response. This was a BBC interview with our energy czar, I guess, or climate change czar, talk about why he thought what was going on in Ukraine was such a tragedy.
I thought we lived in a world that had said no.
Mercy intervenes. I'm not going to play that. He said that I'm afraid that Ukraine will be a distraction from the war on climate change. This is the people we have in charge of our government, folks. He ran for president. Can you imagine? Talk about dodging a bullet. So here's Putin. This is, New York Times editorial, no justification for brazen invasion. You see the pictures. They're him walking across the landscape as a giant. A lot of these things are chosen for effect. This is kind of interesting, too, because Putin has taken this, we have this historical... We're declaring these republics independent, recognizing their independence. We're going in to help them, maybe take them over if they ask. I don't know if that's hurting relations with China. China's kind of backed off a little bit from their soft alliance with Putin. But this is the way it's always been. The Chinese and Russians, when it was the communists in both places, didn't get along. And so geopolitics has a way of being, even the people that seem to be on your side, you hate them. And there's a lot of, there's a Great Wall in China. It wasn't built to keep, the Italians out, right? It was built to keep the hordes from the north, the descendants of whom now live there. So, and there's a brutality to Russia. I have some friends who live there. It can be pretty brutal. So Russia's but will China say, well, wait a minute, you have these breakaway republics that you're representing as independent. Well, Taiwan is a breakaway that declares its independence. Are you affecting our ability to go into Taiwan by the way you're doing this, Vladimir Putin? And Putin will say, well, look, I'm just doing historically what I can. And he'll say this is another thing. Here's his, I think on February 24th, he had this meeting with these businessmen in this big room. It's kind of interesting if you watch his reaction to the talk. This is you could probably the businessman talking, and I'm not photoshopping this. Okay, I think I probably, Pam Howard, does that look like I would be sitting there looking at this if I didn't want to listen to the guy? And he'll come in and he'll speak here and he'll just say, tap, tap, tap. I think he starts speaking here.
Way or another, we were preparing ourselves, including to the restrictions and sanctions that we face, so we were preparing ourselves to that. But what I'm going to say now is a very important thing. I would like to react to what President of the Russian Union of the Entrepreneurs and Industrialists said, Mr. Alexander Shokhin. Russia remains a part of the global economy, and in this regard, to the extent we stay a part of this global economy, we are not going to harm the system, the part of which we continue to fill ourselves. We are not going to deal any damage to the system of the global economy.
Okay, so you understand what's going on there is he's brought these businessmen and essentially to say, hang in there, we're going to figure this out. And he's he's a practical guy. But he also has a plan, but I don't know that it's going as well as he thought. It's the fog of war, so it's very difficult to make any pronouncement. So anybody that says they got it all figured out, just take them with a grain of salt. And I've seen some people on YouTube and people send me things and they go, this sounds like propaganda. And I'm like, it sounds like it to me too. But you can go get Pravda and read it, and it sounds like what you would read in a Russian propaganda newspaper. But this is Foreign Affairs, Council of Foreign Relations. The Middle East moves on. And it's a very interesting article. And it says that, we have this map of the Middle East. But are we really thinking about it in the right way? Putin doesn't see Russia today as the right thing. He looks at Ukraine, a historical wrong. And I think Foreign Affairs, the guy who wrote this article, Mark Lynch, did a great job how an old map distorts a new reality. And he talks about the fact that, we've got a changing map. And there were empires in the past that went down into Africa, and there are relations where people are getting cotton from Egypt and wheat from Ukraine and, fruits and vegetables from Sudan and stuff from Israel and all these intricacies. And could the map change again? And we've had these big empires. And if you want somebody who's going to step in and say, well, I don't like the way the map is now. Historically, we controlled, for 400 years, we controlled the Middle East, and that would be Erdogan in Turkey, who comes from a region of Syria. So here's a clip from this. Says, Cold War cartography is set in stone as it now seems. The American concept of the Middle East has little grounding in pre-modern history. For centuries, the Arab provinces of North Africa and the Levant were part of the vast multinational Ottoman Empire. The coastal communities of the Gulf were organically linked to the Horn of Africa across the Red Sea. Islamic networks connected Egypt and the rest of North Africa to areas deep in sub-Saharan Africa. But instead of looking back that far, the United States adopted its version of the region from a more recent source, the colonialism and great politics of the late 19th century. So here's something that happened. I'm going to play about a minute of this. This is Caroline talking with Joel Rayburn on her show this week, episode 40. I would highly recommend that you get it. They're talking about, well, how does this impact Israel and the Middle East, which I think this is where we sort of get our concerns in Bible prophecy.
That as well, the development of the advanced centrifuges during the lifespan of the deal, which was
this is
allowed,
before the invasion.
Right? And so, David Wormser has argued it convincingly. He said, look, the deal was a snapshot of where Iran was, so that and it enabled Iran to get to where they are today, right? That they could only enrich to 367% in uranium, but that was all they could do in 2015. So it was enabling them to continue to do what they were doing, and it enabled them to develop what they needed to do next. And so, they were willing to give up some stockpile of the uranium in order to get international permission, the U.S. permission, the Security Council permission, to then develop the second generation, third generation centrifuges that enabled them to enrich 10 times the rate and to much higher levels of purity, so that you're taking both the regional aggression, the missile development, the proxy wars, the terrorism sponsorship, and you add that to, right, and you add that to the nuclear proliferation that was happening through R&D during the course of their, supposed respecting the limitations that the JCPOA placed on their nuclear deal, and you see that this was a proliferation, not a non-proliferation agreement. So there's and all of the counter, the anti-chronological explanations of what happened with the deal are indeed unhelpful. But just for 1 second to go back to Israel and Syria. So obviously the peacenik thing, you're not going to, at the Caroline Glick Middle East News Hour, you're not going to get any arguments that the Israeli left's view of Assad is delusional. And deeply detrimental to Israeli national security, and by the way, to U.S. national security, as well as our all delusional strategic policies. But looking at it today, looking at the way that Putin is now, deploying strategic forces against presumably Turkey, the United States, NATO allies in Syria itself, how would you look at this development as an Israeli? Would you be sanguine? Would you not care? Well, that hypersonic missile is not directed at us. That's overkill. Or would you look at it as an upgrade of Assad's strategic significance for Russia, and then as an indication that Russia may become more hostile to Israel? Or where do you see that from the regional actor's perspective, specifically this regional actor, Israel?
Okay, well, so I think anything the Russians do in Syria, they do knowing that they can someday use it to make an implicit threat to Israel. And I think there was a difference of opinion in Israel on that ended with the incident where the Syrian regime shot down a Russian plane in 2018. And the Russians knew that the Syrian regime shot it down, but the Russians blamed the Israelis for the shoot down, and then set out to punish the Israelis for the shoot down, and took the opportunity to move advanced air defense systems into Syria, knowing full well that the Israelis had done nothing to endanger Russian presence and never would. And so that was such a betrayal, and I think it was an eye-opening moment for those in the Israeli system who held out the hope that, well, actually, Putin shares our interests, and the scales fell away from the eyes in that incident. And so, if I were the Israelis, just on the strength of that example alone, I would be very, very concerned about anything that the Russians move into Syria, just as the Turks should be very concerned. Because even insofar, the Russians have not really used their military hardware against the Israelis. they've allowed the Syrian regime to use it against the Israelis, but they have used it against the Turkish military directly. And so both Turkey and Israel, I think, share this interest in not seeing the Russians expand their footprint.
So I think we have to close down because it's the Middle East News Hour, and we're already past that, which inevitably happens.
It happens
with me because I'm famously long-winded. But it seems to me that the take-home lesson for the United States from what Russia's doing in Syria, at the same time that it's massively escalating its aggression in eastern Ukraine, is to, as you say, re-implement and strongly implement fully implement the Caesar Act. And from the Israeli perspective, I think that the obvious play here, maybe not obvious, but the proper play would be to really see where Erdogan is going with his courtship of Israel, and to see how we could safely cooperate with Turkey in Syria and in other places as well.
Yeah, that.
And he goes on to say he thinks that, well, maybe we can cooperate. Israel could cooperate with Turkey, and I think that's a bit of a pipe dream. But he also makes a point earlier in the conversation. Go listen to it. It's about an hour and 15 minutes. So it'd be like shorter than an update, right? And but he says that, Turkey's been a big thorn in the side of Russia. They could have taken Aleppo pretty easily. The Assad army's not any good. And the presence of just 1,000 troops or less of the United States, we have an air cap. We can project way more power than anybody else on the planet because of the coordination of our forces. So far, I mean, there seems to be a concerted effort to weaken that. So I do have two more clips to play. So at the Munich Security Conference, remember this was called Turning the Tide, Unlearning Helplessness. So this was last weekend, a week ago, ended last Sunday in Munich, the security conference. And this is the neoliberal world order, the neocons and that type of thing get together, how we're going to control the world and everything. But it was Turning the Tide, Unlearning Helplessness. It was just kind of interesting. And now we're in a war. There's a big war going on. It's a big deal. So Danny Gantz, the defense minister of Israel, was there, and a subject came up about, there was a Arab representative on the panel, and then they turned to Gantz and asked him, well, what do you think about this Palestinian thing?
What are your views? Are you supporting the two-state solution? And why is it so?
Listen carefully.
Why is it possible to have an agreement with Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco, Sudan? And why is it so difficult to get an agreement with the Palestinians?
Well, those are two different yet completing issues. As said, I believe that the Abraham Accords are strengthening the process of bilateral talks and regional talks between Israel, the surrounding countries, and the Palestinians, that eventually we will find ways of coexisting with one another, respecting one another, while ensuring the security of the State of Israel. I believe that eventually we will find ourselves in a two-entities solution in which we respect the Palestinian sovereignty and governance, but yet we will be respected for our security needs, and it's a bilateral issue between us and the Palestinians. I must say that we cannot ignore the existence of the Palestinians, and the Palestinians cannot ignore the existence of us Israelis in the area, and we must find ways of living with one another. Both sides should take historic decisions as well.
So did you see what he used the term, the two-entity solution? And this is being talked about in Israeli security services. So I'm going to try to jump a little bit ahead. This is Yair Lapid. He's the prime minister in waiting, the foreign minister right now in the Israeli government. And he was interviewed at a conference of presidents of Jewish organizations that took place in Jerusalem this week. And Yaakov Katz, who's the editor of the Jerusalem Post, was asking him a question. And the subject of Russia and Syria came up. Now, well, I'll tell you what happened later. So here's Lapid at that conference.
I don't envy you and the other decision makers in government right now, because on the one hand, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You have the Biden administration, which is going to look at you as one of their closest allies, if not the closest ally in the region, and say, listen, we're sanctioning now Vladimir Putin and other top Kremlin officials and allies, or whatever it might be, and we're expecting you to abide by that. On the other hand, as we have seen just in recent days, there was an alleged Israeli airstrike against Syria on Wednesday night. There was the infiltration of a drone on Friday, another drone a week before. We need to retain, we as a country, need to be able to retain operational freedom in Syria. And as everyone knows, Russia controls Syria today, and we have to work with Russia. So what do you do if this happens?
Listen to what he
manage
says.
Well, the answer is in the question. You manage that. And you manage that in a careful, smart way. I've been telling the world, as I was telling the Americans, we are, even if we understand, I mean, listen, if you don't work according to your own values, and my values are liberal democratic values, then you're not a country, you're a factory. And we are a country. So we're gonna eventually do the right thing the way, according to our set of beliefs and values. But on the way there, we have also a lot of reasoning that we need to make sure is in there, in the decision process. So, and I've been telling the Americans, as I was telling the Europeans, we are in some sort of a way in a bit of a Baltic kind of situation, meaning we have a border with Russia. What we have on our northern border, with our border with Syria, is a Russian border. Because Russia is the important force inside Syria.
So that's kind of an interesting perspective of a Israeli foreign minister, prime minister. We have a Russian border, a border with Russia. Well, it's Syria, but Russia controls it. And so Lapid also early on in this Ukrainian thing, he came out and said, we support the Ukrainian people. Well, there were some other things that happened this week. Here's a Russian Navy formation in the Mediterranean off the coast of Syria, 30, I think it was 30 ships, or no, a dozen ships or more, near the naval base at Tartus. And then the question is, of course, we got this border, and this is the Golan Heights going up to Mount Hermon. And Russia didn't like what Lapid had said about the fact that Israel supported Ukraine. Israel stood by Ukraine. It came up at the UN Security Council meeting on Palestine, which happened right after the thing on Ukraine. Of course, there's the Palestinian representative with his end apartheid ridiculous face mask on. His speech, you can't even understand a word he says. It's not intelligent anyway. But then the Russian foreign ministry, the Russian ambassador to the UN, who is negative towards Israel, said, listen, so look at this issue. Russia took issue with Israel's sovereignty in the Golan. Now, they've recognized West Jerusalem as the capital in the past. But look at what the tweet from the Russian mission at the UN said. We're concerned over Jerusalem's announced plans for expanding settlement activity. Tel Aviv, that was a slap at Israel, the slap at Trump for recognizing Jerusalem as the capital. And so you got to watch these little things that come out of Russia, and these tweets and stuff are very important, which contradicts the provisions of the Geneva Convention that Russia doesn't recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights that are a part of Syria. That's exactly what they said. So, at the same time, there's a increase in the Iranian threat to Israel. All this is going on. The IDF is watching what's going on in Ukraine. Are we getting a picture of the war? New York Times, the whole Sunday Review section this week is a thing by, well, here's some headlines. National Post, Ukraine alone, Ukraine defiant. Panic sweeps the world, and there is some panic in the world. And the New York Times editorial page, Tom Friedman had a big article in it today. I'm not seeing it right at the moment. Came out and said, look, this is bad. But everybody's running around saying, Putin pulled one on us. This is New York Times. By the way, with regard to Russian troop movements in Ukraine, the U.S. government's been sharing that with China and asking China to help out. That doesn't project power or confidence. I wish I could find. Here's a good editorial cartoon. Now don't you misbehave, Vladimir. The world has changed. The map is changing. And when you understand, I think this is where it's important in Bible prophecy. Things will change quickly. They will change rapidly. And then I'll finish with this. I could go forever. Can Israel become Europe's gas supplier? Everybody said, now, if you want, 2 weeks ago, I talked about the East Med pipeline. So here's the Jerusalem Post this morning saying, and I'm not going to go through all that because I spent over an hour on it. I'll do a standalone presentation on that. But, look, the East Med pipeline was essentially shut down by the Biden administration. Now we're trying to sanction Russia. Now, this thing's 5 years away. So I don't think it's going to come about anytime quickly. Turkey doesn't like it, and Turkey got what they wanted. It's been put on hold for now, so it's at least 4 or 5 years away, maybe longer. And it has some, like I said, it's 3,000 meters deep there between Cyprus and Crete. That would be an engineering feat. And Turkey is saying, wait a minute, we have a thing called the Blue Homeland. And you guys need to pay attention to that. I'd recommend you get a hold of the Jerusalem Post from Friday and today and also keep up with it. I think they're doing a great job. Russia's threatening Finland. Don't you dare join NATO. Seth Fransman article, How the Deterrence of Sanctions Failed. INSS report on revisiting the possibility of a regional military alliance. Middle East security arrangement that they talked about in this paper back in 2018 when the INSS proposed this, an Arab NATO. This is Caroline Glick's tweet. It can be said that the Russian move in Ukraine has put an end, at least for now, to what is known as the Pax Americana, the era of global American supremacy. This situation has very negative consequences for us because a very important tier of Israeli deterrence is our alliance with the U.S. Now the value of this component has dropped very significantly. And then this editorial in either Friday or today's, I think it's in today's Jerusalem Post by Stephen Fato, Ukraine's lessons for Israel. I'll summarize it with this. Israel is going it alone. That seems to be fit into this whole scheme of Bible prophecy. So look, exciting time to be alive, and also this article in Why Not about Christian moral failure of Christian leaders on permitting this anti-Semitism stuff of greedy Jews in apartheid state to take hold and not stand up against it. And listen, we stand against that here, clearly, and we call it out. These people are Jew haters of the first rank, in my opinion. But it all plays into Bible prophecy. If you're not saved, if you don't believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, the only hope you have of salvation for your sins, to put you in a right relationship with God, you need and believe that Jesus died for your sins, was buried, rose again on the third day, ascended to heaven, and he's coming back. You need to get right with God, and you get right with God through Jesus Christ, through the salvation of Jesus Christ, because look, Russia, nuclear forces on high alert. Do you think they're aiming those at Ukraine? I'll just be honest with you. So it's like the Cold War is back. It's like the world changed, the map changed. But we know eventually there's going to be a correction on a massive scale. And so I'm not worried about it. It is what it is. So let's pray. Father, thank you for your word. We pray, Lord, that you will give us the confidence that comes of the people who believe in Jesus Christ for their salvation and who look forward to his return. But also, Lord, keep us strong, persevering. Pray for those missionaries in Ukraine and even in Russia that are working hard to harvest souls, that are dealing with people who are under immense stress now. Give them opportunities to share the gospel. Put a special hedge of protection around them so they can do your work in difficult circumstances. Just like those in the first century church help spread the gospel throughout the world. Pray that you will give us that vision, that power to fulfill that work. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.